Hello. Today we're going to talk about why the tech job market is so bad and why you should be mad about it. So let's first start by saying I want to frame this in mainly talking about tech jobs out of the U.S. Historically, the road was taught to kids in high school and college that go to college, study tech, and you'll never have to worry about a job. There'll always be plenty of demand. You will have the skills you need to succeed. And as we are going forward in time, this is particularly for folks who went to high school maybe in the 2010s, early 2000s, even mid 2010s. This fact or this saying is being proven to be very, very false. And in fact, a lot of people who did everything quote unquote right by their guidance counselors and by what the society at large was telling them, it's just not coming to fruition. And a lot of people should feel mad. A lot of people do feel mad, upset, and frankly lied to. And you should be mad. This is not the economy or the job market that you were told or promised about, because unfortunately the economy is a very malleable thing. It changes a lot. And I just want to talk about today why the job market is so bad, to highlight a few of the reasons for why your guidance counselors or older people in your life who may have told you follow this path for success are so wrong. The first one is that a lot of companies now, when hiring for gigs, particularly technical gigs, is they want a candidate who does everything. They want a full all-star candidate who can do, coding, DevOps, QA, the full spectrum, front end, back end, and then on the data side, data engineering, analytics, science, all that jazz. They want that all in one person, which is they want basically a unicorn. In the past, it seemed like a lot of companies were more willing to take on more junior candidates and train them along the way. However, now companies don't really want to spend the time 1, 2, 3 years to either train someone more junior. They want to hire someone from the get-go that has a proven track record of doing software development or technology at like a high level with some experience. They rarely want to take a shot on a newbie from college who may, have come out with a degree but doesn't really have any actual experience in the world. And from the company's viewpoint, that is a much bigger risk than trying to go with a more established person who's proven out that they can do it and who has a lot more skills in their Rolodex. And so for a lot of people who are just coming out of college, if you don't have a lot of experience, it's going to be harder for you. In the past, it was a little bit different. In the past, it seemed, at least just anecdotally, that there were a lot more jobs willing to train you along. But now, this goes to our second point, a lot of companies don't have the time or patience to train more junior people or train people coming right out of college. They want someone to hit the ground running from the get-go. Like, they want a senior engineer when they're posting for a junior engineer role. And that's causing a lot of people coming right out of college to be overlooked by jobs because they don't have that experience. And so this leads us to point number 2. Why are we seeing the shift from companies being willing to train people to wanting an all-star off the get? One of the reasons, in my opinion, is due to the interest rates in the US right now. So when interest rates go higher, that means that there's less overall money in the economy that's going to funnel into venture funding or startups, because investors can get a better return that's more of a guaranteed return by just kind of keeping their money in bonds and getting 5, 6, 7, 8%, depends on what it is. Versus, if the interest rate is really low, it's encouraging money to flow to the private economy, because, keeping the money in bonds would only maybe give you 2%, and the risk versus reward ratio of maybe trying that money and spreading across 10 startups with one becoming potentially $1 billion startup is a lot more attractive. But as rates go higher, it's more economically appealing to just kind of put that money in a bond fund and get 8% risk-free. So what does that mean for companies? So overall, that means for companies is that there's going to be less capital coming to them in terms of investment that they can then use to hire new people. So what that means really is that when kind of capital is rich and flowing like it was during the early 2010s, when there were a lot of software engineering jobs and a lot of people being hired right out of college, a lot of that was because there was the interest rates were so low that investors were willing to take risks on startups, pouring money into them. And that meant that these companies could build out larger engineering teams, which was an issue too, because it kind of got to a glut and then you get to kind of stagnation. But that aside, when there's more money coming into companies, Companies are more willing to build out larger teams. And when companies build out larger teams, they're willing to hire and train and grow new grad software engineers, basically. So there was kind of like that was a more of a meta economic reason for why, in my opinion at least, entry level software engineering jobs or entry level tech jobs are kind of drying up. Is that there's overall less money being funded into companies, smaller engineering teams, smaller tech teams being built due to the less money. And when you have a smaller tech team overall, you're going to go back to, I can't risk 100K on a first year engineer. I'd rather spend 150 for a proven senior engineer who can get productive from day one or from day 30, versus sometimes for a new hire it takes months and months and months until they finally become productive. And that is on a macroeconomic reason number two. Their interest rates went higher, which prevented investor money from flowing down into startups, and being more allocated towards bonds because you get a safer return. And so a lot of that was due to all the money printing that went on during the pandemic, which is you should also be mad about that. That was basically like something had to be done, but the rate that the dollar was devalued at that time, in my opinion, is and was criminal. It just basically made your savings worth 30% less post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic, which is basically an added tax to you, the person, and you should be absolutely furious about that. But that's out of the scope of this video. Let's go into reason number 3, outsourcing. So a lot of companies now, we're living in a more global economy. You don't need to hire in your local city or your local state even to build a team for your company. And what we're seeing a lot of times is now companies are actually, going to places like India, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, to hire people historically who would have been American people, to do engineering jobs at a fraction of the cost of what it costs to hire an engineer in America. And so because companies can do this legally, it is legal. Morally, it is a bit ambiguous from my perspective, but we won't get into the morals of it all. But legally, companies can basically hire one engineer for 20% of the cost. They can hire one engineer in India, Pakistan, Vietnam, wherever, for 20% of the cost of an engineer in America. And from just a numbers perspective, if you're paying 15 to 20K a year for a really good engineer versus 100K a year in America for an okay level engineer, from a company's perspective, it's really a no-brainer. The fact that this is a legal system that we allow in the States and in the economy right now is also why a lot of people who study technology or engineering in college, particularly software engineering, tech, and data, are having a much harder time finding a good long-term position in the workforce, is because these companies can hire someone in the Philippines for 20% of what someone in America would get paid. There's a lot of things that could be a whole separate video itself. There's a lot of positive and negative repercussions of that. And now that only really started happening these last 15 years or so. Once the internet really kind of opened up a more global ecosystem for companies and people to kind of create business relationships. And unfortunately, one negative circumstance is that it is drying up some opportunities for positions that historically would have been for US software engineers are now going globally or internationally, and that's creating the overall pool of jobs for software engineers in America to be smaller than what it would have been if companies were not allowed to hire internationally. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think there's a lot of positives to it too, and it's sometimes can be a win-win situation. But one latent effect on the macroeconomic scale is that it creates a lower demand to a degree. How much that degree can be argued, but it creates a lower demand for US software engineers if companies can hire engineers in Pakistan, India, Philippines, wherever, for a fraction of what they would pay a person in America to do the same job. Okay, reason number 4. So, in the early 2010s, even before that too, software engineering and engineering was pushed as, this is a path to a great career, great economic, secure future. And by doing so, that drove a lot of interest from people to study it. So basically, let's just use some numbers from 2020 versus 2010. In 2010, there were about 39,000 CS degrees handed out in 2010. In 2020, there were 88,000 to 100,000 CS degrees. This is data from ChatGPT, but I'm sure we get the source of it if need be. But the overall point is that a lot more people now are studying engineering recently in like the 2020s versus in the 2010s. And so basically, simple supply and demand. When you have more people doing things, companies are going to be able to choose the cream of the crop or their pick of the litter for who they want to hire, because engineering or CS jobs grew at a lower rate than the amount of people studying CS or engineering degrees from 2010 to 2020. Looking at some numbers real quick, 2010, basically bachelor's in CS degrees more than doubled, yet so like over 100%, it was like 120% increase. But CS job growth from 2010 to 2020, so basically engineering, software engineering jobs and all that, only grew about between 30 to 64% from chat. These are numbers from ChatGPT. So basically, if the supply of engineers is growing by 120%, but the demand or the job rate is only growing by, let's call it 50%, there's a mismatch there. You have 120 versus 50%. You have more people trying to become engineers than there are availabilities or new availabilities for engineers. So that is kind of a simple supply and demand. There are more engineers now than there are, in theory, positions for these engineers. So that's reason number 4. Reason number 5. One factor from the pandemic, after there was a lot of money printed and it was actually easier for companies to raise money during the pandemic because a lot of money was being printed and a lot of money was being thrown around, and people were actually buying a lot more things in terms of real goods, in 2019, 2020, 2021 versus now. There's been a big shift on companies, especially small businesses, to go from growth mode to profit mode. And this is also related to the interest rate point as well. But basically, when companies shift their overall success metric from growth, like a growth KPI, so like just growing revenue for the sake of growing revenue, to going to more trying to maximize profit, those are two different those are two different functions. If you're trying to grow revenue, you could basically say 1 year we have 1 million and next year we have 2 million, but look at it from the cost side. To get that 1 million the first year, say you're spending 800,000, and then the second year, say you're spending 1.9 million, then really, while you grew revenue $1 million in this scenario, you actually percent of revenue per profit actually went down from year 1 to year 2. And so basically when funding and tech startup VC money kind of got tight post-pandemic, a lot of companies shifted their strategy from just a pure revenue growth perspective to a more profit-driven perspective. And in theory, profit is always what companies want to do. But sometimes during the pandemic and in the past, when venture money was flowing really freely, a lot of companies like Uber, let's take Uber for example. Uber has never declared a profit, yet they have like a huge valuation, and that's because they were growing their revenue year over year, but at the same time their expenses were growing too. And I know it's a lot more complicated than that. I'm just using that as a high level example, but the overall point is that there was a pivot on a lot of businesses to go from a revenue growth model to a profit-centric model. And in that shift, going profit-centric, people are going to be, and companies are going to be a lot more concerned about the cost side. Who are we hiring? Why are we hiring this role? Do we actually really need this role? And when you're really evaluating, trying to keep your costs down, that is when there's going to be cuts from junior engineers. That is when you're going to shift to a smaller engineering team. You may have some layoffs, and when you change that model from going to revenue to profit, you're going to be a lot more careful about the people you bring on. You only want to bring on people who can hit the ground running. You want to bring on people with a proven track record, and you're going to be a lot more, well, I'm not saying I am, but I'm saying the environment or market as a whole, which I believe we have observed these last few years, are going to be a lot more sensitive to bringing on people who have not proven themselves yet, especially if they're just starting their career now. To summarize these 5 points, companies want an all-star, perfect candidate versus being willing to train people. Too much competition, more growth in CS degrees than CS job listings. 3, outsourcing. 4, companies going from growth mode to profit mode. And 5, interest rates going higher, to resulting in lower money going into the private sector or VC funds overall, is part of the reason as to why it is seemingly really tricky to figure out this job market from a tech perspective, especially if you're first starting out. And you should feel mad about this, because a lot of promises that were maybe made to you were basically lies. And there's only so much you can do about wallowing in it. A lot of these factors are outside of your control, and the worst thing to do is just pout and be mad. What I recommend you do about it is this is the situation. You can't change the situation, but what you can change is yourself. And what I would recommend for people who are finding it hard to get their foot in the door from a tech career perspective is just go on the offense mode. Go aggressive. You got to really advocate for yourself. You got to play the game. You're going to get rejected hundreds if not thousands of times, but you got to play the LinkedIn game. You got to build a brand for yourself. You got to reach out. You got to be persistent, and you can find something. It's going to be a lot harder now to do it than it was back in 2010. But it is still possible. If you want to become an engineer, if you want to create a career out of being a tech guy, engineering, data, depending what your sub niche is, you can still do it. It's a lot harder than it is now. I've been in my career for like 6-7-ish years now, and I can even see from the time I was looking for my first job to now, the economy and the job market for tech is completely different. Talking to friends, talking internally on my own team, and looking at hiring plans, the market has slowed down a lot, and I think it will get better in the future. In the future, that might be 5 years from now. We're also going to see how AI comes in to handle with all that stuff. But really, my overall point is take the aggressive standpoint. If you want to become an engineer, you can. You just need to knock on, maybe it's 5 times more doors than you had to knock on back in 2020. And knock on, I mean visually, digitally, reaching out from LinkedIn. Cold applying is not enough. You really got to go above and beyond. And then that's the question is should you have to go above and beyond? Historically, we've been living in pretty good times. You haven't had to really kind of go that, 300% all in on the job market. Unfortunately today, especially if you're getting started, you kind of have to go crazy to find a job. And it's not fair. It sucks. But it's the reality of the situation, and there's really no point of complaining about it. We got to deal with the cards we're given today and try to make the best out of them. And so what I'm planning to do for this channel is turn it into a channel all about learning about data techniques, data engineering, data analyst stuff, data science stuff, the math you need for data, all the skills and tools you need to be successful in a career in the data field. And I've been in this field for started studying it over 10 years ago. I'm technically a director of data and analytics now, so I think I know a little bit what I'm talking about. But if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe to the channel. There's gonna be a lot of tutorials and maybe more videos talking about the state of the job market, the state of the economy coming. And if you find that interesting, subscribe and follow along for more. So I hope you liked the video. I'm not trying to paint too much of a negative picture. It is what it is, but we just got to try to make the best of this bad situation that is the quote-unquote job market in America today. And so, hope you liked the video, and I will see you in the next one.